Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the AI Monetization Podcast. I'm Binny, the co-founder of ProjectPro. On this podcast, we speak with AI practitioners inside enterprises to unravel real business outcomes they are seeing with AI and specifically Gen AI. Today, we have with us Zach Elewitz. Zach is the head of AI at Fortune Brands Innovations. Fortune Brands Innovation is a 10,000 plus employee company, and they're the industry leading innovation company that is focused on creating smarter, safer, and more beautiful homes for all of us to live in. Previously, Zach was a director of data science at Wix. Wix was a leading commerce platform that simplified payments for merchants, among many other things. Previously, Zach was an entrepreneur. He was a founder of Pythia, where they built a trading platform from scratch. Zach has a bachelor's and a PhD in math, along with MBA. And he's also on the board of advisors at Texas A&M Venture College University. Zach, thanks for taking time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Zach, one of the things we're curious about is at Fortune Brands, right? It's a very nice industry that you occupy, which is homes and various brands that all of us use to equip our homes. What kind of data science and machine learning problems are on top of your mind at Fortune Brands today that you're solving?
We've got a ton of stuff going on, and I wish I had a bazillion more data scientists so I could do that many more projects because there's so much opportunity here on top of the great things we're already doing. They range from our flow device, which is something that identifies leaks in real time and has been shown to reduce catastrophic leak payments by 96%. So that's a really amazing use case we're proud of. We also are using data science heavily within supply chain and been able to really accelerate our ability to understand what should happen in certain situations as a result, rather than having to be very reactive. There's a great movement towards being proactive, and we're really proud of that. Getting to the Gen AI use cases, there's a really great one we've done around sentiment analysis. So you might not have heard the term or the name Fortune Brands Innovations, but we own a lot of brands that people probably are familiar with. Moen, Masterlock, Therma-Tru, SentrySafe, Larson, House of Roll, lots of others. And so what's really interesting about this is we want to some of our like organization-wide solutions, we need to be extensible to a whole bunch of different use cases. And we have a lot of category managers that really want to understand and need to understand not just what customers think about our products, good or bad, but understand what exactly they're thinking is good or what exactly they're thinking is bad. And so you might think, okay, well, these category managers, couldn't they just, you know, go to go to Amazon, maybe and read through the reviews, or maybe they have ChatGPT, copy and paste the reviews into ChatGPT and ask for some aggregations. But it gets a lot more nuanced than that as you're talking about thousands of different products across dozens of different brands. It just becomes a little bit too hard. And so what we've done is we've generated some really amazing insights in what we're calling the product health dashboard, where we're providing real sentiment analysis that's created fully through ChatGPT. It's really safe for us to do this because it's product reviews, has no sensitive internal information, which makes it a really easy use case to work with. Second, the next thing we did was we really wanted categories, categories, subcategories, and kind of subcategories, so we could have different granularities of insight into what people were thinking about our various products. And what's really great is we've built this to be dynamically generated, because you don't want to have these like very rigid categories, because you're not going to capture the nuanced, amazing, or potentially negative things that people are thinking about the specific products. And so what's really amazing about this is there's a little bit of nuance to it, but it's just a lot of prompt engineering under the hood, but creating amazing insights where our product managers are able to see, okay, hypothetically, oh, an issue has happened in this subcategory. I'm seeing a rise of negative sentiment in a completely hypothetical situation. Let's say this faucet XYZ is starting to leak. Well, now we know for the specific faucet, there's something going on, and you can differentiate that versus, if you had arbitrary categories that are supposed to work for everything, you might have, product defect, and because you have it doesn't create that actionable insight where they immediately can go to those exact reviews and see what to do. And then we're building this out for eventually and for all of our products. So it's really amazing. And on the flip side, let's say we've identified that problem through the product health dashboard. We want to be able to see over time, not just at the current state, what that change is. So once an intervening action has been taken, we want to see that if that negative sentiment is still there, we want to see it go down so we can measure the efficacy of our intervention. And so it's amazing because it's a lot of data. It's very quick to test this out. It's horizontally scalable. And so we'll be able to handle as many products as we'd like. And not only that, but one of the things people are always scared about is, hallucination. Is your product going to be good? So what we've been doing is actually using ChatGPT as our QA as well. And so what we did was, for every, category of products, we'll take a couple and we'll have someone go through what the categories, subcategories, and subcategories should be. Then we have QA, we'll have ChatGPT do its own version of what it should be, and then we'll have it rate itself. And then we'll evaluate the quality of ChatGPT as its own rating system in a subsequent step. And we're getting such high quality regardless of the product category that because we don't need these results to be perfect and it's still really, really high, we're pretty comfortable extending this to new products. So it's been really helpful, and we've been able to move pretty darn quickly. And so it's a project I'm proud of the team for.
That's a very powerful use case, almost like the pulse of the customer.
Exactly.
Yeah. And especially that thing you mentioned about you can really see pre and post intervention, what's happening to those sentiments. That's very powerful. So I'm curious, when you said categories, subcategories, and subcategories, right? Does the LLM by itself categorize these things, or are you mapping it previously saying for these categories, go to these websites? Like how do you do that?
Fairly dynamically generated where we want it to come up with those categories, because if the LLM is good enough and we have enough data, which we do, it should give extremely consistent higher level categories for the products. And then it's in the subcategories and the sub where that changes. There's a bit of nuance in finding the right level of consistency and getting it to stay in the right sort of numbers of subcategories and numbers of subcategories, because it's a balance between you want to be able to track those changes over time, but you also need to give it the ability to have emerging categories. And so there's a bit of a natural tension that takes a little bit of playing there because you want both.
Yeah, makes sense. And also, it's very interesting the evaluation methodology that you have come up with using GPT to kind of rate itself. That's very interesting.
Yeah,
Uh,
because my internal customers are going to say, okay, well, is this good? Why should I trust this? I've heard Gen AI hallucinates. Also, just culturally, this isn't a Fortune Brands thing. It's a everywhere in the world thing. People have their own systems. It takes some effort to get them onto a new trajectory. And so if you can have some quantitative metrics you can utilize with a bit of education to get them excited and comfortable with new tools, you'll have a lot greater adoption. One of the great things that my boss, the head of data and analytics, has done a good job on with data and analytics as a whole, as we've become a centralized organization, is in It's ensuring that each team is tracking and quantifying engagement to make sure that these valuable tools are being engaged with properly. Because if they're not, then hypothetically, we'd either be having, a change management issue, or we're not addressing that core customer concern. And
Yeah.
even if something is amazing, if it doesn't create that value, then we're not spending our time wisely. And so it's a great thing I encourage all people to do who are trying to bring these AI use cases to life.
Yeah, makes sense. And then were there specific challenges that you faced when this kind of moved from just a POC into live deployment and production?
Um, I think some of the biggest ones have been often the POCs are really easy to do because it's just, sometimes it's as simple as a little bit of Python code and ChatGPT that you can, throw together in a couple days. But when you're building a production system people depend upon, it's a completely different skill set. And so I don't necessarily want my data scientists building and basically a nuanced ETL pipeline. I'd rather an MLOps engineer or a data ops engineer be building that out. So that collaboration, and it takes it a step further from like the concept of what needs to happen to really appreciating um, when the business needs it. So we're a major company with tons of brands. We don't necessarily want to pay for you know, updating it every single day. But how often does the business really need these updates and at what time of the month?
Yeah.
You know, if our category managers are doing monthly reporting on the 18th every month, well, it'd be great if you could have this refresh on the 12th so they have time to ask questions. But if you do it on the 1st, then it's kind of out of date information as they're sharing it. And so really understanding and building out the actual software tool to solve the nuances the customer need beyond just that core function. It's just another step or two, and it's not unique to Gen AI though.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And the other use case that we were going to talk about, which is from your experience, moving a payment processing use case from a traditional RPA system to more AI focused. Could you maybe just help us understand where you encountered this, the problem that you're trying to solve, and what kind of payment processing was this?
Yeah. So at a previous organization, one of the core parts of the business was offering credit cards to companies that had fleets of vehicles, and the card would give you discounts, rebates, or whatever around the experience of owning that fleet of vehicles. And and so that ranged from, discounts if you went to particular gas stations, or the ability for owners of the companies to, restrict where the cards could be used. Um, but the way that companies that give out credit cards make money is by people using those credit cards, and so we want to do everything that we can to ensure that our credit card is being used for as much as possible. So one of the things that we were doing was actually offering to say, hey, I know you have these regular payments. We will make them on your behalf as long as you use our cards. And so they don't have to worry about, timing and communication and all that. We will just take care of it all. So it's a win-win for us.
Mhm.
Historically, there was an RPA system in place. So, in case people aren't familiar with the term, robotic process automation. You can think of this as sort of if-else logic, but being implemented in practice. Um, this was a completely great and reasonable approach a couple years ago. It's exactly what I would have built trying to do this because and what happens is we will the way the system worked when I got there was you have the RPA system that communicates with wherever the payment's being made, and you're going through a phone tree just like you would calling the DMV, the government, AT&T. Press 1 for yes, press 2 for no. It's really frustrating to go through, which is why you want to why you want a system to do it rather than paying for a person to do it. Um, and so it would go and it would navigate the phone tree and then make the payment.
Wow.
One of one of the problem the pro there are a couple problems with that. First of all, I know you hear it on every single phone call, but they do actually change the phone trees uh, sometimes. And so an RPA system is brittle. So even the slightest change requires someone to physically go call that phone tree, understand how it works, and then change the logic. But if you're making payments to potentially thousands of different vendors, they're changing often enough that it takes a team of people to be able to keep things up to date. And so it's brittle. Um, it's not extensible. So that means that if you have a new vendor, um, that means you still need to have someone go and call and get down the phone tree exactly what needs to happen, save it in the system, and then start implementing. But then you have even more stuff to manage. You're not getting any like your economies of scale reach some limitation there because eventually you just have teams calling and work going through this. And then if the RPA system fails, which there are a ton of reasons that can fail, sometimes they just won't take a particular card type. Sometimes things just drop. Um, you've had issues on the phone. Um, and then you still have to pay someone, a fixed fee for paying an offshore team to go and try and make that phone call for you.
Mhm.
So it's a lot of work to maintain a system that's automated when you want an automated system to be easy. Um, the amazing part of generative AI now is the ability to have that flexibility, understanding, and context. And so this is unlike earlier when I was talking, the sentiment about products, that's there's not a ton of sensitivity there.
Right.
Like someone else from a different company or a competitor could go and look what people are saying about our products online.
Yeah.
Um, but well, we're making payment information and credit card information and validating that's obviously remarkably sensitive. So we don't want any of that information going outside of our single tenancy. And so what we elected to do was because we didn't want that data exposed, and because this is a very narrow use case, so over the past couple of years, we'd been talking about, okay, how many parameters does it have? Is it 70 billion, or is GPT-5 going to have a trillion? But for really specific use cases, we're not seeing any increase in the quality of the tool we were building by trying to fine tune open source models of bigger and bigger and bigger sizes. So we ended up working with a fairly small one because we had a lot of transcript data, transcription data.
Okay.
And so, so you have the tool which knows the logic.
Mhm.
It will text to speech what happens over a phone call to the phone tree. So you have two basically AI-ish things talking to one another.
Yeah.
The phone tree hears it, does whatever happens there, comes back as sound. We take the sound, we get
Yeah.
a transcription of what they've said, process text to speech all over again. And so it's a really interesting,
Very.
a lot of nuanced steps in there.
Mhm.
Um, so what we did is we found a medium-sized open source model. We
Mhm.
had years of transcript history,
Mhm.
and so we, cleaned up the data and used that transcript history to teach our fine-tuned open source model what exactly needed to be done in different situations. And the big exciting thing about this is on top of the RPA system, where the goal is to, you know, um, scale that back over time so people can be used for more, strategic reasons, strategic applications. Uh, we were able to make just a really big, I think it was seven-figure difference annually. Um,
Wow.
and so that's the sort of metrics you want to be thinking about. A lot of, there are tons and they're infinite large language model use cases, but when thinking about which ones you actually want to do, um, we all have limited resources. If it isn't like fundamentally enhancing your ways of working, creating monumental financial impact, whatever that means to you, or really, really significantly impacting your customer experience, it's probably not worth doing. And we decided that a seven-figure impact annually was worth doing.
Makes sense. That's amazing. And I specifically like the term you used earlier, brittle. That kind of clearly kind of crystallizes the difference between a more rule-based system and something that's a little more fuzzy and it can figure things out as it goes. And was that the fundamental difference that you saw between a traditional RPA and an LLM, the brittleness and the flexibility? Is that the biggest difference?
The brittleness and the ease of having a larger scope, where when you get those new people,
Mhm.
hopefully you get tons of new business, but then you'll have a delay as people are trying to set it up. With the LLM, you can just pop it into your pool of different customers that you're providing the service for, and that's fairly fast.
Yeah, makes sense. And like you rightly said, right, in the product health dashboard use case, the outcomes are a little more, there's flexibility around error rates and things like that. But in a payment processing scenario, there's money involved, very specific phone trees. I assume you need 100% precision in something like this. Is that right? And two, how did you go about ensuring that? Was there a lot of kind of, errors as it navigated the phone tree?
Um, with the actual payment numbers, there's a separate system that does that validation
Okay.
because there was something that was already in place that people were satisfied with that had that 100% accuracy.
Yeah.
And if we had something that was, and even for your own organization, if it wasn't 100%, if you have something that already does that hard part where there's significant risk associated with it,
Yeah.
um, then use that system. And there's some complicated nuance there that we weren't interested in getting into for the LLM. For the LLM part, completely putting aside the financial numbers, um, when I talk about accuracy, I don't mean are you messing up a credit card number, because that's just drawn from a source system, so that's not going to get messed up. But pressing um, two instead of three or something like that. First of all, coming up with what a fair benchmark is step one.
Yeah.
Um, so the most reasonable benchmark, a lot of people will say, 100% AI should be perfect. No, what is where do you define value as being? So if we're B RP the accuracy of the RPA system was our benchmark. And
Yeah.
so once we were beating that, then we were creating, which, you know, there's value brought even if we were just meeting it, but that was the one we chose because I want AI to beat a rule-based system, to be honest. Once we beat that, everything above that was kind of gravy. It was really good.
Yeah.
Um, we didn't need to have that 100% because anything about, every percentage point was, I forget if it was hundreds or how many hundreds of thousands it was. And
Yeah.
so it was so colossal that it was completely fine. And then one of the things you talked about earlier was the difference between like a POC and a true, like that product.
Yeah.
What ends up happening in the real world is, okay, you build your POC, we all agree it's worth investing in. You build your product V1, it's producing the value, but then you all of a sudden notice a practical um, problem or a way that it could be done so much better, it's worth putting some more effort into it. One of the ones for the payment system was it still costs, you're still paying every time it has to decide two for yes, three for no, as you're navigating through the phone tree. Well, if if you have already called that particular vendor and you know a successful payment was made, what you can do is first keep track of what that order was, and
Yeah.
then just do the one that you think is right first.
Yeah.
If that way you can focus the LLM on what and maybe even give it multiple shots on the hardest ones. But if you know something worked last time, try that first.
Yeah.
And so we ended up keeping a catalog of previous successful payment choices through the phone tree and doing that first. And it ended up, really accelerating and taking a lot less time. And those resources aren't tied up. And so I know it's not sexy in today to talk about like the rule-based components of our systems. But in practice, if you can build a simple thing that performs as well or even better than some fancy AI thing. You want to do the simple one so by adding that simplicity, we ended up saving a lot of time and money in saving the AI for the hardest use cases. And that does cost more. And so it was great coming up with that balance.
Yeah, I mean, it's an example of a beautiful use case, which you said is boring, but that's kind of where most of enterprise workflows exist in the boring niche categories that AI is going to go in and kind of make better.
Yeah.
Uh,
Boring just because there are a lot of really impactful, boring things.
right.
Um, I always focus on customer value, not but customer value, success, or fundamentally enhancing our ways of working, even if, people aren't necessarily using this one.
Yeah, makes sense. And you spoke about using an open source model and kind of using training data and all of that. The first impression of most people trying to do these use cases is that they default to a managed services provider like OpenAI because things are deployed, you just call an API. There is not too much ML engineering work involved there. Is that really so complex, taking an open source model and doing everything yourself, or not really? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, it can be pretty annoying. One of the first problems that people also don't talk about is the data cleaning. AI does know how to deal with a lot of hiccups, but if you're fine-tuning something and you have tons of information you're pouring into it because you're trying to get it to learn a very specific use case, in this case, navigating a phone tree, um, there's a ton of garbage in the transcripts because they're keeping in mind, you know, just for example, like press one for yes or two for no.
Yeah,
That changes depending upon the system and what step in the tree. You don't want it to learn what the importance of the number one or the importance of the number two. Also, you have number one way more often you have number seven.
right.
Um, and so figuring out how to adjust that training, figuring out how to clean the data so that it's learning the right things,
Yeah,
and obviously cleaning all the sensitive information out of it. Um, Not that it's a, you know, huge, like, that's a whole other conversation, but cleaning all the sensitive information out of it and being confident that you're not teaching your model, someone else's credit card number is really, really important. And so coming up with all the processes for that when on LinkedIn you say, okay, you just plug the data in and it goes great versus okay, not only do I need to come up with a process for here are the categories and examples of the sensitive bits of information that are included in my training data. Um, does it have to be 100% right? Is there a acceptable minimal amount? Because if you just because you see something once doesn't mean your model's gonna inherently learn it. Coming up with those standards, coming up with not just from a data science perspective, but when you work at a company that has credit cards or deals with financial information, you're working with compliance, legal, and risk within your AI and data science governance framework to talk about acceptable standards in edge cases. And so it ends up being a lot bigger of an endeavor than even just building a model. Sorry, did I answer the question there?
you did,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. You're basically saying, yeah, I mean, there is some complexity involved in the taking an open source and working with it, but there's far greater problems elsewhere, data cleaning, compliance, risk,
Yep.
guardrails, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that's really weird about generative AI is you're not necessarily like when I start a project now, if I were to start a new Gen AI project, I'd be thinking about how long is it going to take me to build this? Because the tools I use to deploy this
Yeah.
are maybe not even the same ones I was intending to use when I started developing it, because there's so many new products coming out so quickly. Um, and
Yeah.
so thinking about that sort of quality, I know there are a lot of things to figure out with LLM ops, um, but I'm not too stressed about the deployment part of it because we're gonna do that. Like that part, there's so many people working on this, and especially if your use case is mostly about scale, the LLM part isn't particularly novel. It's a different type of um, you have your container, which you treat the same way in your deployment status. The nuance comes to, acceptable inputs, outputs, and exception handling. Everything inside the container is where things should be different, whereas the nuance, the container, and the strategy for how to do all that isn't fundamentally that different. Obviously, there are some changes, but it shouldn't be like dramatically or remarkably overwhelming. All the major cloud providers and a number of other people are working on this problem.
Okay, that's good to know. It's comforting to know. Um,
No.
uh, and you made a good point about just because your model sees a training sample once, it's not going to like understand that pattern in the future. But for a use case like this, from your experience, how many instances of something does a model need to see for it to be pretty good at it? Is it in the order of hundreds of thousands or 10,000s?
That really, it's a hard question to answer,
Okay.
and I'm hoping this answer isn't unsatisfactory. Um, but you talk about, for your model to learn something, what does something mean? Um, under keeping in mind as you're building it, and it's a great thing for you to internally track as well, just so you know how much data you truly need, because at some point you've hit such diminishing returns, you're wasting compute.
Yeah.
Um, how big is the concept that you're trying to instill in the model? So like for the payment use case, talking about understanding I want to make a payment versus I want to talk to a person is kind of a smaller concept that are very distinct. But if I'm talking about the concept of teaching it to go through a phone tree, then I need to teach it a whole bunch of small problems like make a payment versus talk to a person. And so keeping in mind what like really clear definition of what problem um, is really helpful. And overall, having a really clear definition of success that is value-based will help you understand what you're really working towards. And just as importantly, when to stop working on the project. Because you could always be improving or tinkering.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah. No, that certainly answers it. I think that the nuance you made between the size of the concept you're trying to teach it, that kind of dictates everything. That makes a lot of sense. And when you decided to pick this open source model, Zach, was this model already pre-trained on something to do with conversations or pre-trained on just a broad database, knowledge base?
It was one of the BERT models that you end up having fun legacy quirks because someone's worked with one before. And so it was something that one of the data scientists had done a POC at some point before. The
Yeah.
model was small enough where it wasn't going to take tons of compute for us to start the experimentation on.
Yeah.
Um, and then before deploying it, even though we'd already trained a model, knowing once we understood all the steps and had all the pipelines built, it wouldn't have been terribly hard to retrain. We actually tried um, redoing all the training on it's like a 7 billion, a 70 billion, like a 700 billion. I don't know if I think it was like a two of the Berts, and I think it was like the llama, one of the llamas.
Yeah.
Um, don't remember exactly, but we really didn't get significantly different results. Um, you expect the larger model to have, additional context starting off that
Yeah.
the smaller model didn't necessarily, but the smaller model, because it's, smaller, if it's easier to shift its, fundamental nature faster. And so we ended up just sticking with the smaller model because it did just as good of a job, if not slightly better, in our situation.
Oh, that's great to know that the smaller parameter model was as effective as many of the bigger ones that you tried out.
I kind of imagine that to be part of the future of large language models. If you have your, paid version of ChatGPT, you go and you see all these agents for particular use cases. They're not starting off with a, you know, crazy huge one every single time. They're finding an appropriately sized one, building it for these use cases. I do see a world in the future, which is we've already taken a few steps towards, where you have your open source models that are focused on coding or focused on history, where they have those additional contexts. So your starting place is so much closer to where you want to get to.
Yeah, makes sense. And you spoke about quantifying the business impact at roughly about $1 million, and then hundreds of thousands of dollars. You started seeing that upside over the RPA, and then you knew everything else was just upside. Could you walk us through how did you roughly quantify the business use case for something like this?
Yeah, so we had um, one of the challenges of this particular one,
Mhm.
which was hard to navigate with the business, um, was like I talked about, there were a lot of reasons payments might um, work or not work.
Yeah,
And the true baseline was the RPA system, but the RPA system, let's call it accuracy for um, sake of ease, the accuracy of that system was a dynamic number going up and down depending upon, has it been updated? Has this problem been fixed? Has a new issue happened with particular vendors? Um, and so, but that needed to be the baseline because we had that movement. So we did like an average. That was how we kind of defined it for us to use as baseline. Um, and then how we quantified it is past the baseline of the RPA. That means we're literally paying someone per individual payment to go out and call the company, and there's a specific um, costs to doing that. And so we could, so for every additional one, we knew how much the LLM cost to run, and we knew how much we would have to pay counterfactually if someone had to manually go and do it. And so we could test, and we could even, what was really cool is not just test overall RPA versus LLM, but we could look at the deficiencies of the RPA and say which ones did the RPA fail on that the LLM would have hit, and really get specific as to the financial impact if this, like while we were still in the POC stage, um, which ones the RPA system wouldn't even be able to touch. Um, and so and so you can really quickly quantify the financial impact that would immediately happen. And additionally, what's really cool about that is you don't always just want to throw your AI system out into the wild. You want to, stage gate its rollout. And so one of the initial steps wasn't replacing the RPA system. It was, you know, RPA system, then LLM, then the offshore resources manually calling, and then you could slowly be transitioning things over and managing the quality of the results. That way, you're creating that value, integrating it into the system, but you're not potentially accidentally creating a problem for existing systems in place and other teams. And so it's a safer way. And there are a whole bunch of different styles for how to roll something out like that. Just depends on your organization and project, but that's how we did it.
And as you see the future of just developers and data scientists, right? To build a system like this, do you see that regular full stack developers will be required to just learn and build stuff like this? Or do you think this would remain the exclusive domain of machine learning engineers, data scientists, building out systems like this? Because there's going to be so many of this going forward.
Um, I see a bifurcation,
Mhm.
um, which I as like I guess I'm a little young to call it old school data scientist, but I was getting into data science in the early 2010s, which is considered fairly early. Um, there, like, you end up having a lot of products like Data IQ, where you have these low code methodologies for implementing data science. They're going to be similar low code versions for LLMs in the future. And so I see a world where you have people where it's so low code, um, you're having potentially even business people, potentially,
Yeah,
or analysts, not necessarily data scientists, able to, they might show that fancy neural network architecture we all know and love,
yeah,
but you'll talk about trade-offs in business terms, and they'll have like little sliders. I see a world where that happens, but I still see the world where people have specific things they're working for because the 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 low code way. It's kind of like how I think about ChatGPT in certain instances. It's not perfect your first, one or two times around if you have like a really hard question you're trying to dig into or something you're trying to create, but it might get you 70% of the way there really quickly. And so maybe this is step one or two, whereas when you need something that's above a certain caliber or doing something really specific, you are having a data scientist work on it who really does understand things a little bit better and understands the implications of data cleaning. Additionally, the low code use cases, I'm not going to trust that financial one for the low code way, at least at the moment, I'm not going to trust it.
Yeah.
The low code way of getting rid of PII, PHI, credit card numbers, stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so you have your for level of complexity and level of risk different applications. And so it's weird seeing like Tableau is working on they're getting to the point where I forget if it's GA or not, but like letting a non-data scientist have predictive models for stuff where like the real like yeah it's cool and it's scary because they don't necessarily sometimes there is important guidance for them to be measuring and building against the thing they want. Plus, they're not doing best data cleaning practices, and so how that manifests in the long run is going to really change use case to use case. But it's a cool and scary world.
Yeah. So the bifurcation that you mentioned makes sense to navigate that cool and scary world. Uh, uh, I mean, this is slightly kind of away from the use case you're discussing right now. As a AI leader, what are your top burning problems or friction points or hurdles in your role um, that you face day to day?
Um, a couple. Some will be boring, some will be exciting. Having clean and accessible data. The core goal of my data and analytics organization is fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. That isn't just for reporting; it's also, for our AI and data science use cases. So having that available, having the right tools and amount of staff. All companies want to be really lean at the moment, but if you can't take away resources from already committed projects, then we can't allocate them for research and development for fundamentally enhancing other ones. Um, Additionally, Gen AI is really cool. I am really shocked that data science is so focused exclusive of foundational, let's call it data science, is focused so much on predictive, not prescriptive. Um, so I have a company that spends millions of dollars on marketing every year to get customers to engage with our products, and we all and also we have a giant global supply chain, um, really getting into the causal relationships that are going on. That's a skill set, just like Gen AI, that the team doesn't have tons of nuance in. So we're working on getting into all of these. We already do a great job at a lot of this, but
Mhm.
taking it to that next level of really granular insights on how to get the most bang for our buck
Yeah.
or make the biggest impact, or in a world where we have so many confounding variables and different things happening at the same time, um, understanding how and more importantly, why we should be making certain decisions. So getting the right tools for our people and the right training. Um, and then one of the things that a lot of organizations fall into, and my org has been good about working on this, is thinking about the AI component of it without thinking about the deployment and the maintenance part of it. You can hire 10 of the fanciest data scientists, but if they only know the data science flavor and don't know the ML ops, the LLM ops, and the CI/CD practices and aren't collaborating with your other members of your broader IT team, then it's not going to be an integrated, successful product. You're going to end up with calls in the middle of the night, or it might not ever get deployed because they don't have that skill set. So really thinking at the fully finished product level, what are the skills needed for that? And the skills needed 3 years to keep it going for the next 3, 5, 10 years potentially. Not just how do we build a model. A lot of people get caught in the how do you build this good model mindset.
Makes sense. So access to clean, interoperable, reusable data, tools for things like MLOps or LLM ops. So you look at the problem as an end-to-end full stack solution, and then the whole getting to the details of nuances of understanding the fundamental business problem you're trying to solve before you bring the AI in. Okay.
Yeah. I guess one more thing would be the people. There are many really smart data scientists in the world, but
Yeah.
sometimes, let's say you're trying to minimize your root mean squared error as a simple example, they'll just keep trying and trying to get smaller and smaller when that has such an unappreciable, infinitesimally small impact at a certain point.
Yeah.
And so what you want to do is not just have, your data science person leader like me who's able to think at the business level. You need to, if they aren't already there, they very well may be, work with the individual data scientists to be thinking at the product level and have those communication skills to appreciate what the business wants. Because if they can be project and product leaders, even if that's not their title, they still need to have that mindset, that drive, and that communication. Then it's not a limiting factor through your people leader. They can autonomously be driving stuff. I don't want to have to be, I don't tell my data scientists, I need you to go and train a model using this approach and whatever. I say, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Let's talk together on what some of the ideas could be. But I want them saying, here's what I want to do. Here's why it's the best decision. And then I just want to be saying, have my couple of questions and be like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's time box it and measure it after that and decide, stage gate. But yeah, that sounds great. It really not only horizontally scales your ability to handle lots of different projects, but it also gives you the best results because your data scientists get to have ownership over their projects, which not everyone unfortunately has the chance to do. So that's another part of it that I've really worked on with people that report into my team.
Okay. That kind of leads into my last and final question, which is how do you inspire and retain and get high quality work from your team? So it looks like ownership is one. Are there other best practices that have worked really well for you to manage your team and set priorities?
Defining success. I can't. There's so many times where I've been, and it's hard sometimes when you're working in ambiguous environments. Defining done, defining success, because that way everyone is working towards the same goal.
Yeah.
Empowerment. So I don't tell them exactly what to do. Most of the time, I'm talking about what we want to achieve, and then try to let them drive, but coming up with a shared vision on how we can be doing that. Giving them the opportunity to fail at the appropriate size and an appropriate domain. I don't want, you don't want it in front of the CEO, but in front of a shared stakeholder as they're learning to talk about this in non-technical language, letting them figure it out a little bit and do a practice session with me. Also, empowerment means you're not micromanaging them. You start off with some level of trust when you come into a new team, even if I hate to use the word earned, but even if you haven't had that experience yet, they've been there longer than you. You want to understand that and let experience drive, oh, I need more engagement here or less engagement here, and that fluctuates significantly over time. getting to the stage and really trusting your people. And if you can't trust your people, um, that's an alignment problem you need to decide how you want to handle. Um, but knowing that your team that you letting your team know that you want to empower them and set them up for the best success, and be blatantly willing to take constructive criticism. Um, there's unfortunately, when you are a people leader, there's a power dynamic between the two of you where,
Yeah.
when their ratings and reviews, which has a financial tie to it, they do want to please you, just like we all do. Um, but having them understand what you really care about is not whose idea it is, but doing the absolute best job. And I keep saying, guys, like you're in this, not me. Tell me what you think and why. I bet and if you have a better idea, I've had people really fight me on hiring decisions, on methodology approaches, and every time I say, "Cool, you're a really smart person. Why are you thinking this way? I'm thinking this way," and we get into the pros and cons, and regardless, you're not always going to, you know, agree at the end of the conversation, but really understanding how they arrived at that answer and why they think it is that way makes them feel heard and a part of the team.
Yeah.
And especially in a really remote culture, that's important. I If you don't end up having that, and it happens as you come into a new role, you end up having situations where someone said, "Yeah, I really thought we should have done that," and I was like, "That was a great idea. Why didn't you tell me a month ago when you had it?" And either they weren't comfortable or they were nervous, and you end up wasting a bunch of time when the people tend to have a lot of good ideas and smart when they work on something every day. And so
Yeah.
it's also um, starting conversations or teams off with my one-on-ones start with how are you? Um, do you have any blockers? And some personal chit chat, and making it about them so they can be driving things. In my twice a year reviews, I do the, hey, here's where I think you can improve. Here's where things are going really great. Here's my vision. I have individual development plans for all of the members of my team. That's not a PIP. That's what do you want in this role or a different role or potentially at a different company. One person told me they want to have their own AI consulting company in a couple of years. I said, okay, wish you wanted to be here forever. Totally get it though, not a problem. Here are the experiences we can get you here that set you up for that success. Um,
Yeah.
and also in those biannual reviews, I say, okay, here's yours. Let's turn it around a little bit. And I obviously encourage communication whenever, but like creating a space where this is really formal, like, what do I need to do better? What do you need differently from me? Because someone telling you they need something different um, isn't necessarily a failure on you, but
Mhm.
it's an opportunity for you to serve the team better, which is your role. And I ended up we had like a big retro after a huge deliverable a couple months back, and two members of my team were like, "Hey, I just think there's some paradigms of how we operate that they just don't work quite well." I said, "Okay, is this like a quick thing or a longer thing?" They're like, "Yeah, it's a bit longer." And we ended up chatting for an hour on what they wanted differently. And I was like, "These are great ideas. Like, I totally hear how we arrived here and why it hasn't been to where we want." But we
Yeah.
were able to make some really big changes into ways of working that has made things a lot easier and faster for them. And it never would have happened if I hadn't repeated over and over again, tell me when there's something better or when I can do something differently. And you want to be the leader that's excited to hear how they can be a part of the change, not the one that people are nervous to come to you, because otherwise people end up doing results or building data and data science products for satisfying you in the conversation rather than satisfying the business need,
Yeah.
because those are different stakeholders. So yeah, it's a lot about the tools, but if your top talent's leaving, um, you're not going to be able to deliver. So I do think that personal part of it there, and I know it feels like it's not always the best use of time, but it also makes work better, is really, really important. So Yeah.
This is solid stuff. But, basically conveying this sense of empathy and vulnerability at some level. So, we're all human and
Yeah.
we're on the same side of the table, even though you're sitting across each other in a meeting, you're solving the same problem kind of feeling. So just for there's a bunch of good stuff you said here. So just for the benefit of the listeners, right? Your leadership guidance is, providing ownership, trusting them, empowering them, and giving them room to make mistakes. And then some very interesting points about your one-on-one sessions, the questions you go through. How are you? Are you facing any blockers? This is my vision for your role and what you have to do. And what do you need from me? So these are some of the things that you go through.
Yeah. Um, you aren't um, managers tell people what to do. Leaders, which we all aspire to be, are
Yeah,
trying to understand how we can get there. You're literally on the same team. Like my goal is to protect them from as much of the politics and empower them to do the best job possible. Sometimes that means that I do boring or frustrating things, um, because that is what can make, because some small conversations and how things work or availability and accessibility can really empower them. So like empowering your team to do the best job as aligned with the broader company strategic goals. That's your job.
yeah. No, very well said, Zach. On that note, thank you so much. This has been a very nice conversation. You had some very structured, thoughtful answers. So thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.